It began with something so small it almost went unnoticed. A wooden stake hammered crookedly into the ground near the old sycamore tree. It wasn't her stake, and it wasn't her land, but it was standing where her roses once grew. At first, she thought it was a mistake, a gardener's misplacement, or perhaps a construction marker. But when she saw the other stakes forming a perfect square across what had always been her property line, she felt the weight of something cold settle in her stomach. The houses on Maple Grove Lane had stood for decades, identical facades reflecting suburban comfort and control. Property lines were invisible boundaries that governed neighborly peace. They defined not just where the grass ended, but where respect began. For years, Evelyn Hart had maintained her half-acre lot with precision, the trimmed hedges, the white mailbox, and the stone path that led straight to her porch. The property had once belonged to her late husband, and she had kept it exactly as he left it, out of memory and duty. The new neighbors arrived one summer afternoon, bringing trucks, laughter, and a different kind of energy to the quiet lane. Their name was Kavanaugh, the sort of people who believed charm could mask arrogance. Within weeks, they repainted their siding, resurfaced their driveway, and installed bright patio lights that stayed on all night. But it wasn't until the fence arrived that their true nature revealed itself. The fence came in sections, dark cedar, tall enough to block the morning sun from Evelyn's kitchen window. The workers didn't knock on her door. They didn't ask. They just began digging, the sound of shovels cutting through roots that had anchored her garden for decades. She watched from her window, frozen by disbelief. The posts marched across the yard like a slow-moving invasion. Each one sank deeper into the soil that had been hers since the property was first deeded in 1982. At first, she tried to reason with herself. Maybe they had the wrong map. Maybe the line had shifted over the years, or maybe the town had made an error. But when she retrieved the original property deed from her late husband's filing cabinet, she found no mistake. The coordinates, the boundaries, and even the small stone marker buried under the lilac bush confirmed it. The fence stood several feet deep into her land. Days passed, and the fence grew taller. The once open stretch of green was now a wall of wood cutting her yard in half. Her roses wilted under the shadow. The air between the two properties thickened with silent tension. She could feel their presence on the other side. Laughter, music, the scent of grilled meat, and the dull hum of power tools echoing against the boards. Evelyn's nights grew restless. She would walk the perimeter with a flashlight, tracing the uneven ground, whispering to herself that she wasn't crazy, that she wasn't imagining the theft of her own soil. She began taking pictures, sunrise, midday, dusk, each one documenting the growing structure. The neighborhood began to notice. Cars slowed as they passed. People whispered at the mailboxes. The EOA, ever so watchful, sent out a friendly reminder about maintaining harmony between neighbors, as if harmony could exist when a fence stood like a scar across stolen ground. When the last panel went up, Evelyn felt a final pang of loss. Her yard no longer flowed freely. Her view, once open and warm, was now claustrophobic and divided. The Kavanaughs hosted a party that weekend, celebrating what they called their new privacy. The sound of clinking glasses and laughter echoed across the fence line, every cheer a reminder of what they had taken. But Evelyn wasn't one to surrender quietly. She began researching late into the night. Zoning laws, property line disputes, land survey processes. Her dining table turned into a war room, covered with maps, measurements, and decades-old documents. She found that the town records hadn't been updated since 1995. No official resurvey had been done since the neighborhood was first divided. That gave her an opening, one that could either confirm her fears or vindicate her completely. The next morning, she called a professional land surveyor. It was an expensive service, one she could barely afford, but she did it anyway. Weeks passed before the surveyor's truck finally arrived. Evelyn watched as they drove metal rods into the earth, cross-checked old boundary points, and scanned the land with laser equipment. When the results came back, the truth was undeniable. The Kavanaugh's fence wasn't just misplaced, it stood 8 feet deep into her property, 8 feet of soil, 8 feet of roots, 8 feet of stolen peace. The surveyor's report became her weapon. It bore seals, coordinates, and signatures, proof stronger than any gossip or speculation. Evelyn filed a formal complaint with the county's property board and the local HOA, and though the process would take months, she was patient. After all, patience was something she had mastered in her years alone. But as she waited, things began to shift in ways she couldn't have predicted. The Kavanaughs noticed her taking pictures and pacing the border. They started leaving their lights on longer, blasting music late into the night, and parking their cars just inches from her driveway. It was subtle, petty, and entirely intentional. The line between annoyance and harassment blurred. And while the HOA claimed to stay neutral, their silence was a kind of endorsement. Evelyn's once peaceful home was now the center of tension that radiated across the block. The neighbors took sides, some whispered sympathy, others avoided her entirely. The story of the fence lady became a quiet legend in the cul-de-sac. And as autumn leaves began to fall, she knew that the battle was no longer about property. It was about principle. About how easily people could take what wasn't theirs and how hard it was to reclaim it. One night, standing by the fence, she placed her hand on the rough cedar. It was cold, damp, and heavy with the weight of intrusion. She whispered to herself that the ground beneath it still remembered her name, even if the world didn't. But she wasn't done yet. The report was only the beginning. The law was on her side now, and she intended to use it. The fence that divided her world was about to become the line that would change the neighborhood forever. The survey report arrived in a thin brown envelope, yet its weight felt immense. Inside lay pages that mapped out truth in lines and numbers, cold, impartial, undeniable. Every coordinate etched a story of possession, and every measurement whispered what Evelyn already knew. Her neighbors had crossed the boundary, literally and morally. The report spoke in a language of precision. It detailed the north-south gradient of Maple Grove Lane, the exact latitude of each stone marker, and the encroachment dimensions down to the inch. Where the fence now stood, the map shaded gray, labeling it unauthorized construction. The phrase alone made Evelyn's pulse quicken. She pressed her thumb against it, as if touching proof could give her strength. Outside, the world looked the same. The fence stood tall, indifferent to human justice. But to Evelyn, every board now screamed guilt. The smell of cedar that once felt clean now carried arrogance. She saw how its shadow cut through her flower beds, carving her yard into two unequal halves, hers and what used to be hers. She made copies of the report, tucking one into a binder marked Evidence A. The rest she delivered to the county assessor's office, the HOA headquarters, and her lawyer's inbox. The process had begun. What she didn't know was that Maple Grove Lane was about to become a stage, and every household its unwilling audience. The whispers began and started quietly. A few neighbors noticed the county's white vehicle parked outside Evelyn's house. The clipboard man with reflective sunglasses took photos, knelt by boundary posts, and spoke into his radio. Word traveled faster than mail. By dusk, the block buzzed with curiosity. At the community mailbox, Mrs. Lawson from across the street told anyone who would listen that Evelyn was suing the Kavanaughs. Others claimed she wanted to tear down the fence, or that she was trying to get the HOA dissolved. Every version carried a hint of scandal, and every whisper made its way to the Kavanaughs' ears. That weekend, Evelyn woke to find a printed note on her windshield. Stop wasting everyone's time. Let it go. No signature. No handwriting she recognized, but she knew. Inside, she kept her composure by cleaning. Dusty shelves became an act of defiance, sweeping the porch a statement of ownership. Her home, though small, was hers, paid for, maintained, remembered. Every tile in the kitchen floor had been laid by her husband's hands. Every wall carried his quiet diligence. She wasn't going to let anyone erase that. The HOA steps in 3 weeks later. The HOA convened a special meeting, Its boardroom, a sterile space inside the clubhouse, smelled of coffee and freshly printed rules. Evelyn arrived with her binder, while the Kavanaughs walked in laughing, radiating confidence. There were no raised voices, just thinly veiled politeness, sharp as glass. The HOA president read from the agenda, Boundary Dispute, Parcel 17B and 18A. Evelyn laid out the survey documents. Lines, coordinates, certified stamps, evidence that couldn't be argued. Yet as the papers passed around, some board members frowned, not at the proof, but at the inconvenience it represented. They worried about community reputation, about liability, about unpleasant escalation. What they didn't worry about was justice. The president suggested a mediation. The Kavanaughs smiled, calling it a misunderstanding. Evelyn remained silent, letting the documents speak. In the following days, HOA inspectors visited both properties. They measured, photographed, and filed reports, copies of which Evelyn never saw. Bureaucracy, she realized, was its own kind of fence, tall, rigid, and designed to keep truth waiting outside. A fence of fear. While paperwork crawled through official channels, the Kavanaughs grew bolder. They planted shrubs along the new fence, thick hedges that blocked what little sunlight filtered through. Their sprinklers now sprayed slightly beyond the wood, soaking Evelyn's soil until it turned to mud. Every day, she heard hammering, drilling, or laughter. The sound ate at her nerves, each thud reminding her of stolen earth, but she documented everything. Photos, timestamps, written logs. She had learned that memory fades under pressure, but records don't. Her binder thickened until it barely closed. It became her shield, a fortress built of paper and persistence. One night, under the dull glow of her porch light, she noticed something new. A small metal stake driven into the ground just outside the fence. It bore a red tag labeled County Property Survey Control Point. The government was watching now. For the first time in months, she slept soundly. The report goes public in early spring. The county assessor's office released an updated parcel map. Anyone could view it online, and everyone did. The new data clearly showed the Kavanaugh fence extending into Evelyn's lot. The gray-shaded overlay marked the encroachment. Screenshots spread across the neighborhood's private Facebook group before noon. By evening, Maple Grove Lane was divided in more ways than one. Some neighbors rallied behind Evelyn, praising her courage. Others mocked her persistence, claiming she was ruining the community spirit. The HOA's silence made things worse, their refusal to take sides only deepening the divide. Then, something unexpected happened. The county scheduled a public hearing. Property disputes rarely reach that stage, but Evelyn's case had drawn enough attention and enough online debate to warrant official review. The hearing room was bright, clinical, indifferent. At the front sat a 3-member panel. 2 men in suits, 1 woman with glasses perched low on her nose. The air smelled of paper and coffee. Evelyn took her seat at the petitioner's table, the Kavanaughs opposite. When the clerk called her case number, she felt time slow. The surveyor presented his findings, pointing to a projected map showing the 8-foot encroachment. Each coordinate matched Evelyn's original deed. There was no ambiguity. The panel questioned both parties, asked for evidence, and reviewed photos. The Kavanaughs' defense, that the previous fence line appeared to be correct, crumbled under documentation. After 2 hours, the chairwoman delivered her decision. The fence, she ruled, violated established property boundaries. The Kavanaughs were ordered to remove it or face daily fines until compliance. Evelyn would also receive official recognition of her property rights through an updated survey record. The decision sent ripples through the room. Evelyn didn't smile. Victory, she realized, wasn't sweet. It was heavy, exhausting, and overdue. Retaliation. That night, she found her trash bins knocked over, contents scattered across the driveway. The next day, someone sprayed a crude message on her mailbox in red paint. Small acts of revenge, the kind that left no fingerprints but spoke volumes. She didn't respond. Instead, she bought security cameras and installed them facing the fence line. The blinking red lights became a silent warning. She was watching too. When the Kavanaughs finally began dismantling the fence, the process drew an audience. Neighbors watched from porches and windows, phones recording. The once impenetrable wall came down board by board, the sound of power drills replaced by murmurs of disbelief. By sunset, a gaping space stretched between the two properties, a scar of bare soil where grass once grew. Evelyn thought it was over. She didn't yet know that the county had discovered something else while updating the map, something that would change everything again. The forgotten path. In the course of verifying Evelyn's boundary, the county's Land Records Department unearthed a document from 1963, an original subdivision map showing an unregistered pedestrian right-of-way that had been lost during later zoning updates. The path ran exactly through the strip of land the Kavanaughs had encroached upon, and by extension, through Evelyn's property line as well. It was supposed to connect Maple Grove Lane to the small public park behind the houses, a walkway that was planned but never built. Legally, the easement still existed. It had never been extinguished, merely forgotten. And by bringing her case forward, Evelyn had unknowingly reactivated it. Within weeks, county workers arrived to survey the area again, this time not to protect private land, but to re-establish public access. Stakes went up once more, this time bearing the county seal. The neighbors who had once cheered her victory now murmured uneasily. The land that had been fought over would soon become open to all. Acceptance and resolve. At first, Evelyn felt betrayed by fate. She had spent months fighting to reclaim what was hers, only to see it converted into something communal. Yet, as she watched the workers measure, dig, and mark, she realized the irony was poetic. The same strip of land that once divided them would now unite the neighborhood in a different way. The path would cut right through where the fence once stood, a walking trail lined with native shrubs and a small gravel border. Children could bike through it, neighbors could stroll, and for the first time, sunlight reached her yard without obstruction. The Kavanaughs were furious, of course. Their once private backyard now faced an open road that would soon carry daily footsteps. They filed appeals, wrote letters, even held meetings to protest. But the law was clear. Public easements, once reinstated, were nearly impossible to revoke. Evelyn watched quietly, a calm observer in the storm she had survived. Her fight had shifted the map itself. A new normal. By midsummer, the county completed the walkway. Fresh gravel crunched underfoot as people tested it out, children on scooters, joggers in bright clothes, dog walkers greeting one another where tension once festered. Evelyn planted wildflowers along her side, turning the edges into a living border of color and peace. She never mentioned the past. The path itself told the story better than words. Visitors often paused to admire the blooms, unaware of the battles that had birthed them. They saw beauty, not bitterness. And that, she decided, was enough. Still, sometimes at night, she'd stand by her porch light and glance toward the faint glow of the pathway lanterns. The laughter, the chatter, the rhythm of footsteps, they were proof that her quiet war had meaning. The next storm gathering, but Maple Grove Lane was a place that never stayed still for long. With every change came new rumors, new grievances. The HOA, now under pressure for mishandling her case, faced internal conflict. Board members resigned, new elections loomed, and whispers of reform filled the air. Evelyn, though reluctant, found herself at the center again. Some wanting her to join the board, to bring fairness back. Others still saw her as the woman who invited the county into their neighborhood. The balance she'd found was fragile, like the petals of her wildflowers, one harsh wind away from scattering. The path gleamed under the streetlights, clean and silent. A symbol, a reminder, and a warning that boundaries once challenged can never return to what they were. And as the season turned, Evelyn sensed that the fence, though gone, had left something behind, not wood or nails, but a fault line that still ran beneath the soil of Maple Grove Lane, the path that now ran, Between the houses of Maple Grove Lane looked innocent, a ribbon of gravel glinting under the sun, flanked by flowers and trimmed grass. To outsiders, it was a symbol of order restored, a public space born from private conflict. But to those who lived there, it was a scar. And scars never really healed. They just blended into the skin of the neighborhood. The walkway had changed everything. Children raced their scooters through it. Joggers passed twice a day, and even dog walkers took shortcuts from the park behind the houses. The sound of footsteps, once foreign to the Kavanaugh's backyard, now echoed like a drumbeat of humiliation. Their once exclusive patio now faced a steady stream of strangers. At first, they tried to ignore it, closing curtains, moving the grill to the other side, pretending nothing had changed. But the truth was unavoidable. Their privacy was gone, replaced by the public's right to pass. And as tension festered, it spilled into something larger, something the HOA couldn't contain. The cracks in the system. The HOA had long prided itself on uniform lawns, regulated mailboxes, and a thick rulebook no one ever truly read. But Evelyn's victory had exposed the truth the board couldn't. To hide, their rules meant little when the county got involved. Homeowners began questioning the HOA's authority. If they couldn't protect property lines, what were the dues for? Why pay hundreds each year to a board that couldn't even stop a fence war from turning into a county project? Rumors began circulating that several board members were stepping down. Some had received angry emails, others threats of recall votes. The president, Mr. Hanley, found himself cornered, literally and politically. And in the center of it all, unwilling yet unavoidable, stood Evelyn Hart. The reluctant symbol. Evelyn had never sought power. She wanted peace, not politics. But when her quiet determination forced the HOA to confront its failures, people began looking to her as something more, a voice of resistance. One morning she found a flyer slipped under her door. Reclaim our HOA community meeting Saturday at 6 p.m. At the bottom, her name appeared among the listed concerned residents, though she had never agreed to it. She considered ignoring it, but curiosity outweighed fatigue. On Saturday evening, she walked to the clubhouse. The parking lot was packed. Inside, the air hummed with tension. People stood in clusters, whispering, gesturing, pointing. The Kavanaughs were there too, seated near the front, their expressions hard as stone. The meeting opened with complaints. Lawns, trash bins, HOA fines, old grievances poured out like water from a burst pipe. But it all circled back to one point: the board had lost control. When Evelyn's turn came, she spoke carefully, her voice steady but measured. She didn't blame anyone directly. She simply stated facts. The HOA ignored her warnings, refused to enforce property boundaries, and sided with convenience over correctness. Her words, though calm, carried the sharpness of truth. The room erupted in applause. For the first time in years, the community wasn't divided by fences, it was united by frustration. The fall of the board. Within 2 weeks, a petition circulated demanding the HOA president's resignation. Signatures multiplied. Whispers turned into declarations. The same neighbors who once avoided Evelyn now greeted her at the mailbox, thanking her for standing up. By the end of the month, 3 board members resigned. A special election was announced. Flyers appeared in every mailbox, some supporting new candidates, others warning that outside influences were ruining the neighborhood. Evelyn received countless calls urging her to run. At first, she refused. She spent enough of her life fighting. But the more she saw the community fracture, the more she realized that walking away would mean letting others rewrite the story, turning her fight into gossip, her truth into rumor. So she agreed. Quietly, reluctantly, but with conviction. Her campaign wasn't flashy, no slogans, no promises. Just honesty. She spoke at small gatherings, explaining how accountability mattered more than control. Her calmness contrasted sharply with the Kavanaughs, who launched their own campaign centered on restoring privacy and preventing government overreach. Maple Grove Lane had turned into a miniature battleground of ideals. The election, the night of the vote, the clubhouse was packed again. Rows of folding chairs faced the podium, where ballot boxes waited. The air buzzed with murmured predictions. Evelyn sat quietly near the back, watching the Kavanaughs whisper to their supporters. The tension felt thicker than ever. When the ballots were counted, the results took everyone by surprise. Evelyn didn't just win, she won overwhelmingly. The applause that followed wasn't just for her. It was for every resident who felt silenced by a system that cared more for appearances than fairness. And though she didn't smile, her heart steadied. For the first time, she wasn't just defending her land, she was shaping the future of it. The new order, as chair of the HOA, Evelyn introduced transparency measures. Meeting minutes were published online, fines required clear justification, and resident feedback became mandatory before rule changes. Under her leadership, the atmosphere shifted. Slowly but surely, fairness replaced fear. Yet beneath that calm, resentment simmered. The Kavanaughs, once dominant voices in the community, found themselves sidelined. Their appeals to block the public path failed. Their influence diminished. They began withdrawing, fewer parties, fewer guests, more silence, until one morning Evelyn noticed something odd. At the edge of the path, where county maintenance ended, someone had begun stacking stones, neatly, deliberately. At first, it looked decorative. But over the next week, the stack grew taller, wider, stretching across a section of the walkway. It wasn't art. It was obstruction. The second encroachment. She took photos, filed a report to the county, and emailed the HOA. The response was slow. Days passed, and the wall grew. Residents began complaining. Joggers tripped. Cyclists swerved. One child scraped his knee. Evelyn knew who was behind it. The stones matched the ones bordering the Kavanaugh's garden. By the time county inspectors arrived, the makeshift wall was waist-high. They photographed it, cited the property owners, and ordered immediate removal. But the damage was done not just to the path, but to the fragile piece Evelyn had built. Whispers began again. Some claimed she was obsessed with the Kavanaughs. Others suggested she was using her position for revenge. The same people who once praised her now questioned her motives. The Kavanaughs, ever strategic, played the victims this time, telling anyone who listened that the constant surveillance and harassment from the HOA had driven them to the brink. And though Evelyn knew the truth, perception was harder to fight than lies. Shadows and screens, her cameras caught everything. The nights when flashlights flickered by the fence line, the figures stacking stones in the dark. She archived the footage, labeled it, time-stamped it. But the county didn't act quickly. Bureaucracy was slow. Outrage was faster. The Kavanaughs began posting on social media, sharing carefully cropped photos of the path, claiming the HOA was overstepping private rights. Their posts gained traction, hundreds of shares, sympathetic comments from people who knew nothing of the real story. Within days, reporters began calling. Evelyn ignored them. She didn't want headlines. She wanted peace. But Maple Grove Lane wasn't the kind of place that allowed peace for long. The night of the fire, it happened 2 weeks later. A small fire near the edge of the walkway, right beside the stacked stones. It burned low but fierce, scorching the gravel and a section of Evelyn's wildflowers. Neighbors rushed out with hoses before the flames spread. The fire department investigated but found no accelerants, no evidence of intent. Could have been a spark, they said. Evelyn knew better. She replayed the camera footage that night. At 11:42 p.m., a faint shadow crossed the path, carrying something metallic. Then a flicker, then light. She turned the footage over to the authorities, but once again, no action came. And so she did what she always did, rebuilt. She replanted the flowers, replaced the lanterns, and refused to let fear reclaim what she had fought for. Still, the smell of smoke lingered longer than it should have. The gathering storm. By autumn, the HOA was once again divided. Half the board supported Evelyn's reforms. The other half wanted her gone. Meetings grew tense, votes tied, decisions stalled. Meanwhile, the Kavanaughs filed a formal complaint accusing the HOA of abuse of power. It was clear now. They weren't just angry, they were strategic. Every step was designed to exhaust her. And yet Evelyn stood firm. The public path remained open. The flowers bloomed brighter than ever. And though her hands trembled when she locked her doors at night, her will did not. Because deep down, she understood something most didn't. People who build fences don't fear losing land, they fear losing control. Drama YouTube storytelling tone. It builds tension, dives deeper into the legal conflict, and ends with a strong emotional and narrative cliffhanger for Chapter 5. Neighbor from hell. They built a fence on my land. I turned their backyard into a public path. The letter arrived on a gray morning, folded neatly in a white envelope with a law firm's insignia embossed in blue. It lay on Evelyn's porch like a quiet threat. When she picked it up, she noticed how heavy it felt, not in weight, but in meaning. Inside, pages of legal jargon unfolded like a slow storm. Defendants, Evelyn Hart and the Maple Grove Homeowners Association, cause defamation, harassment, and violation of property rights. The Kavanaughs had filed a lawsuit. The words bled through her eyes before they reached her mind. Her pulse quickened. Her kitchen clock ticked louder than usual. Outside, the sun hung low, its light filtered through the leaves like judgment. For months, she had fought to prove her innocence, her right, her ground. And now, the people who had trespassed on her soil were accusing her of trespassing on their peace. It was a strange kind of irony, the kind that cut deeper than injustice. The weight of paper. Evelyn spent the evening reading every page. Legal accusations stacked against her like bricks. Emotional distress. Public humiliation. Loss of property value. The Kavanaughs claimed the walkway's creation had destroyed their privacy, reduced their home's worth, and subjected them to ridicule. They sought damages, $75,000 in compensation, plus attorney fees. She called her lawyer, the same one who had helped her during the survey case. His voice was calm, but his words offered little comfort. It's retaliatory, he explained. They're trying to wear you down. It's common in property disputes. The goal isn't to win, it's to make you quit. Evelyn didn't quit. She'd learned that persistence was the only weapon against people who believed intimidation could rewrite truth. Still, she felt the chill of uncertainty creep into her bones. Legal battles weren't fought in fields or yards. They were fought on paper, in silence, and they bled you slowly. The HOA devised again. The lawsuit didn't just target her. It named the HOA as co-defendant, accusing the association of harassment and unlawful interference. The board, once united behind her, began fracturing under the pressure. Some members panicked, fearing personal liability. Others accused her of dragging them into a private war. Meetings grew tense. The same room where neighbors once applauded her, now filled with whispers of blame. The Kavanaugh's lawyer, a man named Raymond Kessler, attended one meeting uninvited, calm, confident, smiling. He handed out copies of the lawsuit as if distributing invitations. His tone was measured, his words courteous, but his presence was invasive. He spoke of amicable resolution, compensation for damages, and the potential for settlement. It sounded polite until you listened closely. Then it sounded like blackmail dressed as diplomacy. Evelyn watched faces around the table shift from loyalty to fear. She recognized the look. It was the same look people wore when they realized the truth was more expensive than lies. The first court summons weeks passed before the first hearing date was set. Evelyn prepared meticulously, documents, photographs, correspondence, everything labeled and bound. Her binder, now swollen with years of history, became her armor once more. The courthouse stood at the edge of the county, tall, echoing, indifferent. The day of the hearing, rain swept across the parking lot, turning asphalt into mirrors. Evelyn arrived early, clutching her umbrella like a shield. The courtroom felt colder than she expected. The Kavanaughs sat across the aisle, dressed sharply, their lawyer between them. They didn't look at her. They didn't have to. Their silence was its own weapon. When the judge entered, time seemed to fold in on itself. Words became evidence became argument, and argument became noise. Evelyn spoke little. Her lawyer handled most of it, calm, factual, precise. The Kavanaugh side spoke of harassment, public intrusion, and emotional damage. They painted a portrait of victims under siege, their home invaded by strangers, their lives disrupted by the walkway's construction. But then came the county documents, maps, deeds, official orders, all proving the path's legality. The judge listened, expression unreadable. At the end of the session, no verdict was given. Instead, the court scheduled mediation, a polite way of saying settle this quietly. The storm wasn't over. It was just circling back. Mediation. The mediation room was smaller than the courtroom, yet somehow more suffocating. A round table, 4 chairs, a neutral facilitator with a soft voice. Evelyn sat opposite the Kavanaughs once more. Their lawyer opened with a proposal. If the HOA agreed to close the path and Evelyn issued a public apology, they would withdraw the lawsuit. The offer was absurd. The path wasn't hers to close. It was county property now. An apology? For defending her rights? The irony was almost laughable. She refused, politely but firmly. The mediator sighed, scribbled notes, and adjourned the session. Outside, Evelyn walked past the courthouse steps under a pale winter sky. The air smelled of cold concrete and exhaustion. She had won battles before, but this was different. This was attrition, a slow erosion of willpower. The community fractures. As word of the lawsuit spread, the neighborhood changed. Some residents avoided her, afraid to be seen taking sides. Others offered quiet support, brief nods, short words of encouragement. But there were darker moments too. Her mailbox filled with unsigned notes. Stop ruining the neighborhood. Sell your house and leave. We were fine before you came along. The walkway itself became a symbol of division. Some still used it daily, while others deliberately avoided it, walking blocks out of their way just to make a point. At AOA meetings, attendance dropped, complaints increased. The atmosphere grew heavy, filled with the stale scent of resentment. Evelyn found herself staring at the clock more often, counting minutes until meetings ended, counting hours until morning light. The county's response when the county attorney caught wind of the lawsuit, things shifted slightly. The government had a stake in defending the public easement. If Evelyn and the HOA were forced to close it, it would set a precedent. A formal letter arrived, stating that the county would intervene as an interested third party to protect the public walkway. It was a small victory, but one that came with a cost. Now the case was larger, slower, and more public than ever. News outlets picked it up again. Headlines read, HOA faces legal backlash over public easement dispute. Evelyn's name appeared in print again and again. She had wanted peace. She had become a symbol instead. The breaking point weeks turned to months. Legal fees piled up. Her savings dwindled. Even small pleasures, coffee on the porch, walks to the mailbox, became clouded by the constant weight of litigation. One night, as she sat surrounded by papers, she caught sight of a small envelope slipped under her front door. Her heart stilled. She opened it cautiously. Inside was a single photo, grainy, printed on cheap paper. It showed her porch, taken from across the street, late at night. No note, no signature, just the image. She stared at it for a long time. Then she turned off the lights, drew the curtains, and sat in the dark. The fence was gone. The path was open. But the fear had returned, silent, invisible, personal. Turning the tide the next morning, she went to the police. The photo was filed as evidence, though there wasn't much they could do. Still, something changed in her. Fear turned into resolve. If the Kavanaughs wanted a war of endurance, she would match them. Every document, every letter, every email became part of her archive. She compiled timelines, cross-referenced public records, traced permit dates. And that's when she found it. A technicality so small it almost went unnoticed. When the Kavanaughs built their fence years ago, they had never applied for a retrospective compliance certificate after its removal, a mandatory step required by county law when altering property boundaries. On paper, their lot was still listed as under review. It meant their property rights were temporarily restricted, including their ability to file certain claims involving boundary use. Her lawyer smiled when he saw it. "This," he said, "changes everything." The courtroom returned. At the next hearing, the courtroom buzzed louder than before. Reporters filled the back rows. The Kavanaughs sat stiffly, confident as ever. But when Evelyn's lawyer presented the missing compliance certificate, the judge's expression shifted. Legal arguments flew back and forth, dense and precise. The Kavanaughs' lawyer tried to dismiss it as a clerical oversight, but the judge wasn't convinced. The case couldn't proceed until the issue was resolved, and by law, resolving it could take months. The court suspended all proceedings. In practical terms, it meant victory for Evelyn. The lawsuit was frozen, a battle put on pause indefinitely. Outside, the air felt lighter. For the first time in months, she could breathe without the taste of fear. Shadows of triumph. That night, Evelyn walked the public path under the glow of new solar lanterns installed by the county. The gravel crunched beneath her shoes. The air was cool, quiet, peaceful. She stopped halfway down the trail, where the fence once stood, and looked toward the Kavanaugh house. The curtains were drawn, the lights were off. It was tempting to feel satisfaction, but all she felt was exhaustion. Justice wasn't joy. It was relief, and even relief came heavy. She closed her eyes, listening to the faint hum of the streetlights, the distant barking of a dog, the soft whisper of leaves, and then, faintly, she heard it. Footsteps. Slow, measured, deliberate. They came from behind her, on the same path, crunching softly in the gravel. When she turned, there was no one there. Only the wind and the sound fading into silence. The neighborhood slept soundly that night, unaware that another storm was already forming, one not of property or paperwork, but of something far more personal. This part deepens the emotional and psychological tension, showing the dark retaliation phase of the HOA war. Neighbor from hell, they built a fence on my land. I turned their backyard into a public path. The frost came early that year. Mornings on Maple Grove Lane began with breath clouds and cracked driveways glistening under the pale sun. The path that once hummed with laughter now lay empty most days, its gravel damp and silent. To most, the season marked quiet hibernation. But for Evelyn Hart, it was the calm before something colder. The lawsuit's suspension hadn't ended the war, it had only changed its shape. The Kavanaughs no longer smiled in public. They no longer hosted parties or waved at neighbors. They lived behind curtains now, behind tinted glass and quiet fury. And though they said nothing aloud, Evelyn could feel their resentment radiating like static from across the property line. It began again, not with a bang, but with small things, the kind of things you could almost convince yourself were coincidences. The harassment begins one morning. She found her trash bins overturned, lids broken, garbage scattered like a storm had passed through. She cleaned it up, telling herself the wind had done it. The next day, her garden hose was sliced clean through the middle. By the third incident, she stopped pretending. Someone was sending her a message. Her cameras caught glimpses, flickers of movement, shadows too quick to identify. One frame showed a figure in dark clothing walking along the edge of the path at 2:47 a.m., pausing, looking toward her porch, then disappearing into the darkness. She sent the footage to the police. They filed another report, added it to a growing list labeled vandalism under investigation. But the calls kept coming, anonymous numbers. Late at night, she'd answer to silence, just the faint sound of breathing before the line clicked dead. Every night, she double-checked the locks. Every morning, She walked the perimeter of her yard before stepping outside. Fear became routine. Isolation neighbors began to withdraw again. Some said nothing out of discomfort. Others avoided her entirely, afraid of being caught in the feud's wake. The HOA board still supported her in name, but the enthusiasm had dimmed. People wanted peace, even if it meant ignoring injustice. Evelyn understood that kind of fatigue. But understanding didn't make the loneliness easier. Even the path, her unintentional monument to persistence, had turned against her. Teenagers used it now as a shortcut, leaving snack wrappers and graffiti along the posts. County maintenance came irregularly, the edges of the gravel now overrun with frostbitten weeds. The fight had consumed everything, her time, her savings, her faith in community. And yet she refused to move. Her house was more than property. It was memory. It was all that remained of her husband, of the life they'd built. She would not surrender it to fear. The anonymous letter. It came folded in half, tucked into her screen door one morning, written on plain white paper in block letters. You should have stopped when you won. Now it's our turn. No signature. No fingerprints. Just the faint smell of smoke. Evelyn read it twice, then a third time. The letters were pressed deep into the paper, written with such force that they left indents on the back. She photographed it, filed another report, and stored the original in her binder. That binder, once a tool of order, now felt like a lifeline, a record of everything she survived. But something inside her shifted. She wasn't scared anymore. She was angry. The watcher in December, the days shortened into early twilight. Streetlights flickered on before dinner. And it was then, just after sunset, that she began noticing the watcher. From her kitchen window, she could sometimes make out a faint figure at the far end of the path, near the bend where the county's lampposts ended. Always standing still. Always watching. Too far to see a face. Too patient to be random. At first, she thought it was paranoia. She'd blink, and the figure would be gone. But then she began taking photos through the blinds, grainy images showing a tall silhouette, motionless, on the edge of the public path. She sent the photos to the police again. They increased patrols, drove by occasionally. But the watcher never appeared when they came, only when she was alone. The fear that had once faded returned sharper than before, not loud, but suffocating. The HOA in chaos. While Evelyn endured sleepless nights, the HOA was collapsing under pressure. Insurance costs from the ongoing lawsuit mounted, meetings devolved into shouting, and resignations became common. Whispers spread that the association would dissolve entirely, a rare but legal option when community governance broke down. Without the HOA, Maple Grove Lane would fall into chaos. No enforcement, no maintenance, no mediation. Just raw neighbor against neighbor. Some blamed Evelyn for it all. Others blamed the Kavanaughs. The truth was simpler. The community had built its harmony on shallow ground. And once someone challenged the illusion, the structure cracked. Still, she kept showing up to meetings, even when no one else did. She sat in the empty hall, reading old records under flickering lights, as if her presence alone could hold the place together. The breaking point had happened one icy morning in January. She woke to find the walkway littered with broken glass, hundreds of shards glittering in the weak sunlight. It stretched from one end of the path to the other, impossible to cross safely. Whoever had done it knew what it meant. The path wasn't just her victory, it was the neighborhood's reminder of her defiance. Destroying it was symbolic. She called the county, filed another report, then spent the afternoon sweeping glass herself. Her hands trembled from the cold and from anger, but she didn't stop until every shard was gone. When she finished, the path was clean again. The act of defiance felt almost sacred. But as she turned to head back inside, she saw it, a single, fresh footprint in the gravel behind her, large, deep, facing her house. She froze, looked around. The yards were empty. Curtains drawn. The silence was heavier than the air. The neighbor's turn. That evening she received a knock on her door. When she opened it, she found not an enemy, but a neighbor she hadn't spoken to in months. Mrs. Lawson stood on her porch, her hands wringing her scarf. Without words, she handed Evelyn a small USB stick. "You should see this," she whispered before leaving. Inside, Evelyn plugged it into her laptop. The file was a short video, security footage from Lawson's camera across the street. It showed the Kavanaugh's driveway at 2 a.m. A car door opened. A man stepped out, tall, wearing a hooded jacket. He carried a bag, walked toward the path, and vanished into the darkness. Minutes later, a faint flash of light, the reflection of glass scattering. Evelyn paused the video, heart pounding. Finally, proof. She sent the file to the police that night. It was enough to reclassify the vandalism from unknown to suspected. A small step, but in her world, small steps were victories. The counterattack. The police questioned the Kavanaughs, but they denied everything. Still, the tension exploded. For the first time, the couple began showing open hostility, shouting during HOA gatherings, accusing Evelyn of spying and threatening civil retaliation. But Evelyn had changed. She no longer responded with anger. Instead, she acted with precision. She knew the law now, every ordinance, every code, every loophole. She requested an official restraining order citing harassment and vandalism. The court granted a temporary one within 48 hours. When officers served the papers at the Kavanaugh's door, half the neighborhood watched. Curtains twitched. Cars slowed. For once, the silence favored her. Retaliation fails weeks passed, and the Kavanaugh's aggression began to falter. The watcher disappeared. The calls stopped. The vandalism ceased. They had lost their power, not because they'd been punished, but because they had finally been exposed. The court date for the restraining order's extension was set for spring. Evelyn prepared once again, documenting, printing, cataloging. But deep down, she sensed this was no longer about courts or boundaries. It was about endurance. She had outlasted them. The night of the storm. Then came the night the power went out. A fierce windstorm swept through the county, knocking down trees and power lines. The entire neighborhood went dark. Evelyn sat by candlelight, listening to the wind howling outside. Rain battered the windows, thunder shook the walls. She felt the loneliness of her home more acutely than ever, surrounded by silence, by the memory of every battle fought here. But through the roar of wind, she heard something else, faint, rhythmic, the crunch of footsteps on gravel. She moved to the window, heart thundering. The path was barely visible under the flickering lightning. For a moment, she saw nothing. Then, a shadow. Moving slowly, deliberately, closer. The power returned in a single surge. The lights blinked on. The path was empty. But when she opened her front door the next morning, she found something resting on her porch step. A single piece of cedar wood. Weathered, splintered, unmistakably a remnant of the old fence. No note, no explanation. Just the past, returned to her doorstep. Evelyn held the piece of wood for a long time before setting it beside her binder. A reminder that even when wars end, they don't truly disappear. The fence was gone, but its ghost still lingered, waiting for its moment to rise again. This is where the story escalates again. The Kavanaughs strike back. The fence mysteriously reappears, and Evelyn's calm begins to fracture under the weight of obsession, truth, and fear. Neighbor from hell. They built a fence on my land. I turned their backyard into a public path. Chapter 6. The fence returns. The piece of cedar sat on Evelyn's porch like a ghost, splintered, gray, weathered by time, but unmistakably part of what had once divided her world. She stared at it for hours that morning, the cold wind tugging at her robe, the clouds above gathering like silent witnesses. It wasn't the kind of thing you could mistake for coincidence. Someone had brought it there. Someone wanted her to remember. The storm had passed, leaving the air raw and still. Branches lay scattered across lawns. The path behind her house glistened with rainwater, small puddles reflecting the dim sky. But something about the silence unsettled her. It wasn't peaceful, it was expectant. She picked up the cedar plank and carried it inside, setting it on the dining table beside her binder. For a long time she simply looked at it, tracing the old nail holes with her fingertips. The scent of aged wood carried memories she had spent years trying to bury, the months of fighting, the hearings, the humiliation. And beneath those memories, a whisper of something else, unfinished business. The first signs the next morning, she noticed something odd along the walkway. At first glance, it looked like a pile of branches left behind by the storm. But when she walked closer, her heart sank. They weren't branches, they were posts. Wooden, cut, sanded, and arranged neatly by the edge of the path, just behind her property line, new cedar. Freshly treated. Her stomach turned cold. She counted them, 8 in total, stacked carefully as if waiting to be installed. By afternoon, the workers arrived, not county workers, private contractors. A pickup truck with no company logo, just 2 men unloading tools and digging near the same boundary line that had sparked the entire war years ago. She approached cautiously, keeping her phone camera recording. They avoided eye contact, mumbling something about property restoration, a word that could mean anything, and usually did when people wanted to rewrite history. Within an hour, the first post was upright, sunk deep into the soil. The fence was coming back. The county's confusion, she called the county office immediately, her voice steady but sharp. The official on the line sounded puzzled. No active permits filed, he said. Nothing authorized for that location. She forwarded photos, timestamps, and video evidence. The county promised to send an inspector within 72 hours. 72 hours, enough time for the fence to return entirely. That night she barely slept. She sat by her window, watching the silhouettes of the new posts sway in the wind. The sound of hammers echoed faintly, like ghosts working through the dark. By dawn, 3 panels stood tall. By noon, 5. It wasn't as large as before, not yet. But its presence alone sent the same chill through her chest that she had felt years ago when the first fence went up. The neighborhood reacts. When word spread, neighbors gathered quietly near the path, whispering. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others avoided eye contact with her, afraid of being seen taking sides. The HOA board, now half vacant and barely functioning, issued a vague email. We are aware of an ongoing boundary concern and are awaiting county review. Evelyn knew what that meant. They were stepping back, letting the mess unfold. Only Mrs. Lawson dared to approach her. They're doing it at night, she whispered. I saw the lights. They start after midnight. Evelyn nodded, jaw tightening. I know. She installed additional cameras, 4 this time, covering every angle of the property line. Red lights blinking like sentinels in the dark. Still, each morning brought new bores. The fence was rebuilding itself, piece by piece, as if the land itself was conspiring to erase everything she fought for. The return of Kessler 2 days later, a familiar car appeared. Sleek, black, bearing a gold insignia on the door. When the man stepped out, Evelyn recognized him instantly. Raymond Kessler, the Kavanaugh's lawyer. He stood by the half-built fence, inspecting it with a clipboard. When he noticed her watching from the porch, he lifted his hand in a courteous, mocking wave. No words were exchanged. None were needed. She sent the photos to her attorney that evening. He responded with frustration. They're daring you to act. If you confront them directly, they'll claim harassment. Let the county handle it. But Evelyn knew the county's pace, slow, procedural, blind to urgency. By the time paperwork caught up to action, the fence would be complete. And once it stood again, tearing it down would mean starting the war all over. The inspection on the 4th day, the county truck finally arrived. 2 inspectors examined the site, measuring, taking notes. The Kavanaugh stood nearby, pretending calm. After an hour, one inspector approached Evelyn's porch. His face carried the practiced neutrality of bureaucracy. "There's a complication," he said. "They're building just outside the register easement line. Technically, it's legal." Evelyn's heart sank. Just outside. Inches away. Enough to make it lawful. Enough to make it untouchable. The fence didn't block the public path this time. It bordered it. But visually, emotionally, symbolically, it was the same wall all over again. It cut her view. Cast its shadow over her wildflowers. Erased the openness she had earned. The inspector shrugged apologetically. "Nothing we can do." The power of perception. The news spread fast. The same neighbors who once sympathized with Evelyn now sighed in resignation. "They have a right," some said. "It's their property this time." No one cared that the placement was an act of quiet cruelty. A structure meant not for function, but for reminder. The Kavanaughs began decorating it. Hanging lanterns, planting shrubs, painting sections in glossy stain. By week's end, it looked permanent. And Evelyn, once again, became the woman behind the wall. But something inside her had hardened. Fear no longer drove her, purpose did. She had learned every inch of the law, every precedent, every loophole. And she knew something the Kavanaughs didn't. The public easement required visibility access. Any structure obstructing the view within 5 feet of the path's edge could be challenged under safety code. The fence might stand today, but tomorrow she would start the process to make it fall again. The breaking of the calm that night, as she sat at her desk drafting the new complaint, the motion lights outside flickered. Her camera switched on. She looked at the monitor. A figure, hooded, tall, stood by the new fence, facing her yard. Not moving, just standing. She zoomed in, but the image blurred under rain. The figure turned slowly toward the camera, then disappeared into the shadows. Minutes later, a sound thunk. Something hit her window. She rushed to the living room, heart racing. Outside, lying in the wet grass, was another cedar plank, this one newer, freshly cut, the edges sharp. It bore a single word, written in black marker. ENOUG. She didn't call the police this time. She simply placed the plank beside the first one on her dining table. 2 relics now. 2 warnings. The newspaper the next morning. The local newspaper ran a small article on the dispute. The fence that wouldn't die, ongoing tensions on Maple Grove Lane. It quoted anonymous residents, mentioned a long-standing feud, and described her as a former HOA leader entangled in a personal vendetta. No mention of trespass, or harassment, or years of evidence. Just the caricature of a woman who couldn't let go. Evelyn folded the paper neatly, placed it atop her binder, and sat in silence. Outside, the sound of hammers began again. Every nail they drove into that wood felt like punctuation, a sentence marking her defeat, a period where she had once written victory. The visitor that evening, as dusk turned to night, there was a knock on her door. Not hurried, slow, deliberate. When she opened it, she found a man in a county maintenance jacket holding a clipboard. His expression was uneasy. "Ma'am," he said, "off the record, I think you should know. Someone filed a request with the county to relocate part of the public path. The request came in yesterday, approved under special variance. It moves the path 3 feet inward. Right up to your property line." Her breath caught. Who filed it? He hesitated. Kavanaugh's attorney. Names on the paperwork. She thanked him, closed the door, and stood still. The war had just evolved again, from fences and boards to paperwork and boundaries. Every inch mattered now, and they were closing in. Evelyn turned off the lights and stood at the window, staring into the night. The new fence gleamed faintly under the streetlight, the rain dripping down its smooth cedar boards. It stood silent, proud, defiant, a symbol of persistence, of control, of mockery. And beneath the hum of the wind, she could swear she heard something else. Not footsteps this time, not a car. The soft, hollow echo of a hammer, tapping once, twice, then silence. The fence was back. The battle was reborn. And Evelyn Hart was once again standing on the edge of her land, ready to fight for the ground beneath her feet, no matter what it cost this time. Morning came quiet and gray, the kind of quiet that felt like the air itself was holding its breath. The newspaper still lay on Evelyn's doorstep, but she didn't read it this time. She already knew what it would say. The relocation request had gone through, officially, legally, irrevocably. Public walkway, the symbol of her long-fought victory. The one thing that had justified her sleepless nights and endless court filings was now being moved 3 feet inward. Not onto the Kavanaugh's land, onto hers, 3 feet. It didn't sound like much. But it wasn't about the measurement, it was about what it meant. It meant that they had managed, through paperwork and persistence, to undo everything she had built. It meant that the county now had a legal right to access a strip of her property. It meant that the ground she had fought to protect was no longer hers. And worst of all, it meant that the Kavanaughs had won, not with a fence, not with force, but with the same system she once believed in. The orange stakes by afternoon, county workers arrived. She watched from her porch as they drove bright orange stakes into the soil, marking the new alignment of the public path. Each one landed with a hollow thunk, echoing like a slow heartbeat. The stakes cut diagonally across the edge of her lawn, slicing through her flower bed and right past the corner of her porch. The walkway would now run close enough that anyone walking by could look straight into her windows. She approached one of the workers, a young man with tired eyes. "This isn't right," she said quietly. He hesitated, then shrugged. "All I know, ma'am, is the paperwork's approved. We're just following the line." The line. That word again, always the line. Invisible, shifting, sacred to some, weaponized by others. Evelyn stepped back, watching as they continued hammering stakes. Her wildflowers, crushed under their boots, released faint scents of lavender and loss. By sunset, the new boundary glowed like a scar-orange plastic fluttering in the cold wind, marking the place where her victory had been amputated. The SOS silence. The HOA didn't call a meeting this time. They didn't send emails or updates. The few remaining members wanted nothing to do with the new conflict. Their term was ending soon, and they hoped to leave before the situation exploded again. To them, the path relocation was a county issue, not a neighborhood one. But everyone knew what was really happening. The Kavanaughs had maneuvered behind closed doors, using their attorney's influence to file a public safety variance. They argued that the original walkway alignment posed visibility risks and created congestion near private property. No one questioned it. No one fought it. Evelyn had become a cautionary tale, the woman who never stopped fighting and therefore stopped being heard. The neighbors turned that week. Something changed in the neighborhood. People who once greeted her now averted their eyes. Conversation stopped when she approached. Rumors spread like frost across morning lawns. Some said she had lost the lawsuit. Others claimed she was being forced to give up her home. The truth didn't matter anymore. In Maple Grove Lane, truth was a whisper easily drowned out by gossip. Even Mrs. Lawson, once her ally, grew distant. The stress had worn everyone thin. "Maybe you should let it go," she murmured one morning, eyes downcast. "Sometimes peace costs less than justice." Evelyn didn't answer. She just nodded, turned back to her house, and locked the door behind her. Inside, her binder sat open on the table, filled with years of documents, maps, evidence. She stared at it for a long time, realizing it was now a monument to a war that no one else remembered. The first excavation, when the county excavation began, the sound shattered the quiet rhythm of the block. Backhoes rumbled, digging into soil that had been untouched for decades. The first scoop of dirt was like a wound opening. Evelyn stood at her window, watching as workers tore through her lawn. The path's new curve took a piece of her garden, part of her fence foundation, and the edge of her walkway. The smell of earth filled the air, damp, raw, familiar. It smelled like the day the first fence was built. One worker unearthed an old stone marker. her husband's original boundary post, buried years ago when the survey proved her right. They tossed it aside carelessly, unaware of its history. She watched it fall into the dirt, forgotten. Something inside her broke quietly then, not anger, not despair. Just a clean, cold clarity. The letter that evening, she wrote a letter. Not to the HOA, not to the county, to the local newspaper editor. She described the years of disputes, the evidence, the shifting boundaries, the public easement, the new relocation. She included photos, documents, and a timeline that stretched across almost a decade. Her tone was calm, factual, and precise. She didn't accuse. She didn't plead. She simply told the story as it was. A story of how bureaucracy had replaced fairness, how silence had replaced justice. She mailed it that same night, walking the envelope down the newly marked line of orange stakes. The wind bit at her face, but she felt something she hadn't felt in months: control. The article 3 days later, the article went live. When boundaries move, a homeowner's fight against quiet corruption. It wasn't front-page news, but it spread. Local blogs picked it up, then neighboring county pages. The comments flooded in sympathy, outrage, curiosity. Some dismissed her as obsessive, but many saw something more. A warning about how easily the powerful could twist the law. Within a week, the county office received over 100 calls demanding a review of the variance approval. Public pressure, once silent, now roared. For the first time, Evelyn wasn't alone. The counterblow, but the Kavanaughs responded fast. They hosted a neighborhood gathering that weekend, free drinks, catered food, music. Their backyard lights glowed like a stage, laughter spilling over the new fence. They painted themselves as victims, a couple bullied by an unstable neighbor who couldn't move on. They spoke softly, politely, with just enough charm to win sympathy. By Monday, the tide shifted again. Half the neighborhood signed a petition supporting the Kavanaughs, urging the county to uphold the existing relocation for community harmony. The war of words had replaced the war of wood. And Evelyn, watching from her darkened porch, realized the truth. They didn't need to win legally anymore. They only needed to make her look unreasonable. The breaking of trust. Late one night, she noticed a car parked across the street, engine off, lights dimmed. It stayed there for nearly an hour. When it finally drove away, she walked out to check the mailbox. Inside, she found her own letter, returned to sender. Stamped in red ink. Address not found. The address was correct. It hadn't changed in years. The stamp wasn't a postal error, it was deliberate. Someone inside the system had intervened. For the first time, Evelyn felt small, truly small, against the machinery she was fighting. The county, the neighbors, the board, even the mail, all threads in a web she couldn't untangle anymore. The awakening, but defeat didn't sit well with her. It never had. The next morning, she drove to the county archive. The building was cold and silent, its fluorescent lights buzzing faintly. She spent hours combing through zoning records, permits, and property transfers. And then she found it, buried in the appendix of the relocation file. A signature that wasn't supposed to be there. The HOA president's name. The same one who had resigned months ago. His approval, backdated, validating the relocation on behalf of the association, even though the board had dissolved. Forgery, it was right there in black ink. Her hands trembled as she photocopied the page, sealing it inside a new folder labeled Evidence Phase 2. The fence had returned. The path had shifted. But now she held something far stronger than outrage. She held proof. The silence before the strike that night. She didn't pace. She didn't watch from the window. She simply sat at her dining table, the photocopy laid out beside the cedar planks, the binder, and the 2 warning words, ENOUGH. The clock ticked softly. The air was still. Outside, the new fence gleamed under the streetlight, a perfect line separating what was once hers from what was taken. And though the war had cost her nearly everything, peace, trust, companionship, it had given her something else in return. This time she wouldn't wait for justice to stumble its way toward her. She would bring it to their doorstep. Neighbor from hell, they built a fence on my land. I turned their backyard into a public path. Chapter 8. The Exposure. The photocopy lay flat on the table beneath the dim kitchen light, crisp, undeniable, and humming with consequence. One page, one forged signature. It looked harmless, almost mundane, but Evelyn knew what it was. It was the key that could unravel everything. She had stared at it for hours, tracing the ink lines where the former H.O., a president's name, curled neatly, too neatly. The date below it was backdated by nearly 2 months, aligning perfectly with the timing of the relocation approval. Someone had used that man's authority after he resigned. Someone had wanted the county to believe the HOA supported the path shift when it hadn't even existed anymore. Forgery wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. And Evelyn finally had proof of it. For years she had fought this war through boundaries, fences, and hearings. But now it wasn't about property lines, it was about truth. And truth, when cornered long enough, stopped whispering. It started to roar. The preparation she spent the next 3 days preparing. Every document she had ever collected was reorganized, cross-referenced, and labeled. She rebuilt her binder into a fortress of evidence. Property deeds, survey maps, emails, inspection reports, photos, timestamps. The forged document was the crown jewel, tucked between pages that told the story of how it came to be. But this time, she didn't go to the HOA. She didn't go to the county office either. She went straight to the press. The same journalist who had written the earlier article met her at a cafe downtown. He arrived skeptical, notebook in hand, expecting gossip. By the time she finished, his hands were trembling slightly as he flipped through the papers. "Are you saying," he whispered, "the relocation was approved using a fake signature?" Evelyn simply nodded. He exhaled slowly. "Then this isn't a neighborhood dispute anymore. It's fraud." The article dropped 5 days later, on a Thursday morning. Its headline was simple but devastating. Forgery in Maple Grove. HOA signature used in unauthorized property deal. It spread faster than anyone expected. News outlets picked it up. Online threads erupted. The county commissioner's office released a statement promising a full and immediate review. The story named no individuals outright, but everyone in Maple Grove Lane knew exactly who it was about. The Kavanaugh's lawyer, Raymond Kessler, had filed a relocation request. His name was on the paperwork, and now so was the forged signature that made it valid. Within hours, the county suspended the variance approval pending investigation. Work on the new path stopped. The orange stakes, symbols of defeat, were uprooted and piled by the curb like discarded evidence. For the first time in months, Evelyn felt the world tilting back toward her side. The neighborhood reacts. Maple Grove Lane woke up divided again, but this time the line wasn't between Evelyn and the Kavanaughs. It was between truth and pretense. Neighbors who once avoided her now whispered apologies. Some left flowers by her mailbox. Others sent messages through the HOA's defunct email list, thanking her for standing up when no one else would. But not everyone was repentant. The Kavanaugh's house stayed dark, curtains drawn tight. Their vehicles disappeared from the driveway for days. Some said they'd gone to stay elsewhere. Others said they were meeting lawyers. The air felt charged, a strange calm, thick with the weight of retribution. Even the walkway, half dug and abandoned, seemed to hum with new life. Children played near it again, unaware that beneath their laughter lay the ruins of a neighborhood's deceit. The investigation county officials arrived within a week, escorted by law enforcement. They carried sealed envelopes, recording equipment, and clipboards. Evelyn watched from her porch as they entered the Kavanaugh's property. For hours, they moved back and forth, photographing, comparing signatures, interviewing witnesses. The sun shifted across the sky while the street buzzed with quiet tension. By evening, the officials left carrying boxes of documents. The news vans arrived minutes later. Reporters knocked on doors, asking questions about the HOA, the relocation, the fence. Evelyn didn't answer at first. She simply stood behind her curtain, watching the chaos unfold like a storm she'd predicted years ago. When she finally stepped outside, the cameras turned toward her. She didn't say much, just one sentence. The truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs time. It was enough. The collapse. Within a month, everything changed. The county released its findings, the signature was confirmed forged. The relocation permit was revoked, the original easement reinstated, and an investigation into possible legal misconduct was launched. Raymond Kessler resigned from his law firm under professional review. The Kavanaughs withdrew their lawsuit entirely, filing a motion for dismissal to preserve privacy, but privacy was gone now. Their names were public, their reputation tarnished. The neighbors who once praised their parties now crossed the street to avoid them. Their tall cedar fence, once polished and proud, became an eyesore, a monument to arrogance. Graffiti appeared on its boards one night, a single word sprayed in white paint, LIAR. It was cleaned by morning, but the ghost of it remained, faintly visible under sunlight. The HOA resurrection, the fallout didn't end with them. The entire HOA was forced into reformation under county oversight. A temporary committee was formed, younger, cautious residents, determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past. They approached Evelyn, asking her to serve as advisor, not leader this time. She accepted quietly. She didn't want authority anymore, just accountability. Her first act was symbolic. The reinstatement of the community's original map, boundaries corrected, easements clearly marked. Transparency became policy. Every document now public, every meeting recorded. The neighborhood began to heal, slowly, awkwardly, but genuinely. And for the first time in years, the air on Maple Grove Lane felt light again. The price of truth, but victory, as Evelyn had learned, always came with a cost. The path remained open, but her lawn was ruined. Her garden was gone. Her savings were nearly empty. The house, once her sanctuary, felt older now, tired from carrying so much history. At night, she sometimes heard echoes of the past, the sound of hammers, the murmurs of arguments, the thud of a cedar plank hitting wet grass. Yet in the mornings, when the sun rose over the open path, she felt peace. Not the kind that comes from quiet, but the kind that comes from endurance. She hadn't just survived the storm, she had changed the weather. The unexpected visitor, it was almost spring again when a car stopped in front of her house one evening. A woman stepped out, mid-30s, wearing a county badge. She introduced herself as an internal investigator handling the case. She thanked Evelyn for her cooperation, then handed her an envelope. Inside was an official letter, recognition for civic integrity and persistence in public service. But attached to it was something else, a folded document bearing a county seal. A map. It showed a proposed community walkway expansion, one that would extend from the current path through an unused strip of county land, connecting the entire neighborhood to the park beyond the main road. The proposal was named after her. The Hart Pathway Project. Evelyn stared at it for a long time, unable to speak. The name looked strange on paper, part victory, part eulogy. The investigator smiled softly. You turned a private fight into a public good. Most people don't get that far. Then she left. The fence falls weeks later. The Kavanaughs moved out. No farewell, no listing, no notice, just gone. The house sat empty for months before being sold to a quiet couple who never asked about the past. On a bright April morning, a county crew arrived. Without announcement, without ceremony, they began dismantling the fence. Board by board, nail by nail. Evelyn watched from her porch, tears welling but unshed. The sound of wood cracking under metal wasn't painful anymore, it was cleansing. When the final post came down, sunlight flooded the space where shadow had ruled for years. And in that light, the path looked endless. The quiet ending. As evening fell, Evelyn walked the gravel path one last time before dusk. The air was warm, alive with the scent of new blooms. She passed the old boundary, now unmarked, and paused where her husband's stone marker once stood. She placed a single flower there, lavender, the color of memory. The neighborhood behind her was peaceful. The war was over. In the silence, she could almost hear her husband's voice, calm, steady, proud. The fence had returned. It had fallen. But the story it left behind would stand forever. Spring arrived early that year, soft and slow, like an apology whispered through the wind. The trees along Maple Grove Lane flushed green again, washing away the memory of gray fences and courtroom days. Where once there had been conflict, there was now motion, workers in neon vests, survey flags fluttering, the faint smell of gravel and fresh soil drifting through the air. The Hart Pathway project had begun. The groundbreaking Evelyn watched from her porch as the county crew broke the first layer of ground. Cameras flashed. A small ribbon fluttered between two wooden stakes. The mayor gave a short speech about civic courage and the power of one resident as persistence. Evelyn stood at the edge of the crowd, unnoticed at first. She wore her old sun hat, the same one she'd worn the day she planted her wildflowers years ago, before the first fence, before the lawsuits, before the sleepless nights. When the ribbon was cut, the sound of applause rolled down the street like gentle thunder. It wasn't loud or grand, but it was enough. For the first time in years, applause didn't sting. The rebirth of the path, the new walkway followed the same course as before but extended beyond it, winding past the park and toward the community's edge. It curved elegantly through what had once been private lawns, now surrendered willingly for public good. Along its borders, the county planted saplings, maples, birches, and lilacs. Small plaques identified each by name, one of them bearing an inscription, "The Hart Pathway, dedicated to those who stand for what cannot be bought." When Evelyn saw it, she felt her chest tighten, not with pride, but with a strange mixture of grief and release. The battle that had consumed so many years of her life had become a trail for others to walk without ever knowing what it cost. That was the point, she realized. Legacy was never about being remembered. It was about leaving something that no longer needs you. The neighborhood heals. Maple Grove Lane transformed slowly. The old divisions dissolved like frost in sunlight. The new homeowners brought laughter, children, and small gardens that spilled color across the street. The path became the heart of the neighborhood, a place for morning jogs, evening walks, and unspoken forgiveness. The same people who had once whispered behind closed doors now waved at one another across the gravel. Even the air felt different, lighter, open, no longer carrying the scent of cedar and resentment. Evelyn tended the flowers beside her porch, the way she always had. But now, when she looked out, she saw more than her yard. She saw people moving freely, couples holding hands, teenagers racing bicycles, elders sitting on benches under the new lilac trees. The sound of footsteps, once the echo of intrusion, had become the rhythm of belonging. The visitors, sometimes strangers, came, reporters, students, planners. They walked the path with cameras and notebooks, studying the case that had changed county zoning policy. Evelyn rarely spoke to them. She preferred to watch from afar, listening as they called it a landmark in community rights. One afternoon, a young journalist knocked on her door. She asked Evelyn what it felt like to have her name attached to something that would outlive her. Evelyn thought for a long moment before answering. "It feels heavy," she finally said. "Because every victory begins as a wound. You just learn to live with the scar." The journalist wrote that down carefully, though Evelyn suspected she didn't fully understand it. You had to have lived through the noise, the loneliness, the waiting, the endless watching of lines being drawn and erased, to know what she meant. The empty house next door, the Kavanaugh home, stood unsold for months. Eventually, a young couple bought it, quiet, respectful, unaware of the history buried beneath their lawn. They painted the siding pale blue and planted roses along the back fence. Evelyn sometimes caught herself staring at their yard, half expecting to see the shadow of the old fence return. But it never did. The new owners didn't believe in walls. They left the backyard open to the path, a seamless continuation of space. At night, the porch lights from their home cast soft gold across the gravel, erasing even the memory of where the division once stood. The invitation months later, Evelyn received an invitation from the county office, a ceremony to mark the official completion of the Hart pathway. She almost didn't go. Public gatherings still made her uneasy, memories of meetings and hearings too sharp to forget. But that morning, as sunlight streamed through her kitchen window, she noticed the reflection of the path on her wall, flickering like water, alive, forgiving. She went. The ceremony was simple. No speeches this time, just a slow walk down the finished trail. Children scattered flower petals, and the mayor placed a small bronze plaque near the entrance. Evelyn walked last, her footsteps light against the gravel. When she reached the end, she turned back and saw the entire neighborhood stretched before her, connected, quiet, whole. And in that moment, she understood what peace finally felt like. The reflection. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn began to write, not legal notes, not complaints, but memories. She wrote about the first stake, the first fence, the night of the fire, the sound of hammers in the dark. She wrote about what it cost to stand alone, about how victory often arrives wearing the same face as loss. Her stories were simple, almost meditative. She didn't write for others. She wrote for herself, to make sense of the years spent fighting for something as intangible as a line in the dirt. Sometimes she would pause, listening to the sound outside, footsteps, laughter, dogs barking, bicycles whirring. It no longer startled her. It comforted her. The last cedar plank. One afternoon, while cleaning her storage room, she found the 2 cedar planks she had kept. The ones that once appeared on her porch, marked with warnings. She hadn't touched them in years. They were lighter now, brittle at the edges. The ink on one faded until the word enough was barely visible. She carried them outside and placed them by the base of one of the new lilac trees. Then she pressed them gently into the soil, letting the earth reclaim them. When she stood back, the boards were gone from sight, buried, finished. The letter that evening, as the sun dipped low, a letter arrived from the county's Department of Urban Design. Inside was a single line of text. The Hart pathway has been added to the permanent public registry of civic landmarks. No ceremony, no fanfare. Just a quiet acknowledgement written in government ink, the kind that doesn't fade. Evelyn folded the letter carefully and slipped it into the back of her binder. The binder that had once carried every record of war now held only that one-page piece. The night walk on the first anniversary of the project, she walked the path alone. The lanterns glowed softly, the air smelled of lilac and rain. Each step felt lighter, freer. She stopped midway, at the exact place where the first fence had stood, and looked up. The stars were faint but steady, reflected in the damp gravel. She smiled, not the smile of triumph, but of release. The war was gone. The fear was gone. Only the path remained. Neighbor from hell, they built a fence on my land. I turned their backyard into a public path. Years passed. Seasons layered themselves over Maple Grove Lane like soft paint, spring after spring, fall after fall, until time itself blurred the edges of what once divided the neighborhood. Children who were not yet born when the fences stood now raced their bicycles down the path that carried Evelyn Hart's name. They didn't know the story. To them, it was simply the way home, a strip of gravel and light winding through green yards and laughter. But the earth remembered. The neighborhood now Maple Grove had changed. The houses were repainted, the trees taller, the air filled with weekend music and the clink of garden tools. The HOA that once ruled through silence now governed through transparency. Its new website displayed meeting notes, budgets, and photographs of the Hart pathway at sunrise. The old disputes had become folklore, softened, retold in fragments at barbecues and community gatherings. Some called it the fence war. Others referred to it as the story of the woman who wouldn't move. Nobody argued about who was right anymore, because, in a way, everyone knew. Evelyn's quiet years. Evelyn lived simply. Her house remained the same, white siding, neat porch, the faint scent of lavender drifting from the wildflowers she replanted each spring. She stopped attending HOA meetings, she no longer needed to. The system had learned its lesson. Sometimes the greatest change comes when you finally step aside. Her binder, once thick with papers, rested on the top shelf of her bookcase. Dust gathered along its spine, but she never moved it. Inside, the final page still held the letter from the county confirming the pathway's permanence. She'd read it only once since. Once was enough. She spent her days tending her garden, reading on her porch, or walking the path at dusk when the lanterns began to glow. It had become her ritual, the act of walking what she once fought for. The visitors returned every so often. Visitors still came. Planners, journalists, students of urban policy, young, eager, full of questions. They asked about civic activism, boundary disputes, the meaning of public land. Evelyn answered what she could, always ending with the same line. It's not about land. It's about what people do when they think no one is watching. They always wrote it down grateful, though she could tell most of them wouldn't truly understand until life taught them something similar. When they left, she'd stand by the fence line, or where it used to be, and watch them disappear down the curve of the path, their voices fading into the evening air. The county ceremony. On the 5th anniversary of the Hart Pathway, the county hosted a small gathering. The plaque was polished, the benches repainted, and a new sign installed at the entrance. A public space is born not from agreement, but from courage. Evelyn attended quietly, standing among strangers who didn't know her face. A young councilwoman gave a speech, recounting the history of the walkway and the anonymous resident whose persistence preserved community access. When the speech ended, the councilwoman looked directly at Evelyn, a faint smile of recognition passing between them. Not public acknowledgement, but something better, understanding. That was all Evelyn ever wanted. The final season. Years later, when age began to slow her steps, she moved through her home with deliberate care. Her world had grown smaller, porch, kitchen, path, yet fuller in ways she never expected. Neighbors often waved as she passed. Children greeted her as Miss Hart, unaware that the ground beneath their feet once cost her a decade of peace. One crisp autumn morning, she left her house before dawn and walked the path one last time. The air was thin and golden. The lanterns still glowed faintly against the fading night. Each step crunched softly under her shoes. Halfway down, she stopped and pressed her palm to one of the lilac trees. Tall now, its branches heavy with scent. Beneath its roots lay the cedar planks she had buried years ago. The wind rustled through its leaves, and she smiled. The morning after, when neighbors found her later, seated peacefully on the bench near the plaque, the sunrise had just reached the path. A book rested on her lap, open to a page marked with a pressed flower. She was gone. Quietly, gently, the way she had lived. The county later placed a small bronze inscription on that bench. Evelyn Hart 19472029. She drew a line and turned it into a road. Years later, long after her passing, the story of the Hart Pathway became part of local history. Teachers told it to students learning about civic engagement. Documentaries used it to explain the power of ordinary persistence. Her name became shorthand for fairness, a reminder that one voice, steady enough, can move boundaries meant to be fixed. The path itself thrived, repaved, expanded, planted with new trees. Every spring the lilacs bloomed brighter. Visitors paused to read her plaque, sometimes leaving flowers, sometimes just silence. And on quiet nights, when the lanterns flickered and the wind moved through the leaves, the sound resembled footsteps, steady, calm, deliberate. The same rhythm Evelyn Hart had walked for years.